So in June this year, in support of the George Floyd Black Lives Matter protests across the US and the whole world really, which are still continued to this day, itch.io has released one of the most astounding video game bundles ever conceived on their platform, the Bundle for Racial Justice and Equality. It started out with only a couple of hundred games, but then more and more developers kept coming in and contributing to and adding to the pile, and it ended up as this gargantuan bundle of over 1,700 games and more. The whole thing was sold for $5 minimum, or however much anyone wanted to give. The bundle exceeded its stretch goals multiple times and ultimately ended up raising over $8 million, which was all completely donated to the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and the Community Bail Fund, split 50-50. Now, I know I'm a little late with this. It's almost September and the bundle isn't even available anymore, but still, for this episode of Games from Underground, I've decided to do something special. Planning this for quite a while, and I'm really excited for it. Because even though you can't buy the bundle anymore, I know that there's a lot of people out there who are now suddenly sitting on a dragon hoard of nearly 2,000 games, and that can be quite overwhelming. Like, if you would play every single title in that list for just 20 minutes, it would take you a good 24 days. So in this video, I'm gonna give you a small selection of titles from that bundle that you might have overlooked and or not want to miss out on. And hey, if you haven't bought the bundle at the time, it's still worth your while because every single title that I'm showing today is also 100% worth getting on their own. Like, I think I owned 4 of the games shown today even before the bundle came out and never regretted the purchase. Now, one thing that I've been meaning to do with Games from Underground for a long time, this series has always been about boosting signal. So far, mainly for small indie game developers. But for a good while now, I've been toying with the idea of inviting guest creators to the show. So in this episode, each of the picks of the bundle will be presented by friends and co-creators of mine that I've invited to help me out with this. And lastly, but very importantly, the YouTube ad revenue for the first 90 days of this video, which is the biggest chunk, after that it's mostly just trickle, will be donated to the same charities that the Bundle for Racial Justice and Equality supported, equally split 50-50. So while I'm normally all for using the ad blocker on the internet and on YouTube and whatever, this might be a video where it makes sense to turn it off for a couple of minutes and maybe click an ad to just help out because, you know, the proceeds get routed to a charitable cause. So here we go. So for the first segment of today, I asked Ian Danskin if he would cover one of his favorite picks from the bundle, and because Ian's a better person than me, he immediately said, hell yes, I'm on board. So for today's segment, Ian picked a game that a lot of capital G gamers would call not a real game, which is always a sign for me that you're doing really good stuff as a game developer. He's covering one of those games that simulates the bipedal motion across a virtual space for the sensual walking simulator. It's a walking simulator, sort of. Bleak Blues and Other Moods by Connor Sherlock.
Remember outside? Bleak Blues and Other Moods can't properly be called a walking sim for a couple of reasons. First, it's not a singular game. It is the third collected volume of Connor Sherlock's Walking Sim a Month project. This is not a walking sim, it is 9 walking sims. Second, you don't do a lot of walking. The worlds contained within are unbounded, and if the itch page is to be believed, infinite, and there's a lot of ground to cover. So unlike most walking sims, where if a run button even exists, it's the difference between a stroll and a saunter, Bleak Blues lets you sprint. And sprint you shall, that seems to be the intended experience. It's what the trailer showcases, and in number 7, the English Evergreens David Bowie is running to, collision detection is set up so if you run into a tree, it shunts you to the side instead of stopping you so as not to break momentum. With head bob and audible footfalls to give you a real sense of being embodied, letting you feel like a deer charging full pelt through an endless purple wood, and it's just nice. It is a mood. I think that's what appealed to me when I saw the game in the itch bundle, or rather, picked it off a list of promising games Ragnar gave me because his was longer than mine. Thanks for being a better person than me, Rags. Some people want power fantasies in their escapism. I just wanted 9 someplace elses. Worlds that are pretty, or eerie, or captivating, or desolate. Just anywhere but my living room. I love my housemates, but I would sever a limb to go a day without seeing them. Connor Sherlock's worlds are all good places to be alone in. In a couple, you start in tight, enclosed spaces before wandering out into a huge expanse, the indoors suddenly looking like a strange intrusion on the landscape. In one, you explore an empty city seemingly with a jetpack, but no, not a city. More the idea of a city. In a loose sequel to that one, you run for minutes on end across the desert towards another idea of a city. This one both buried and unearthed by the sands. One opens with you falling through a yellow sky for so long, you wonder if the ground even exists. There are no narratives to speak of, and outside of basic movement, no mechanics. Gaming pundits like to pretend there is a battle between people who find games meaningful when they tell stories interactively, and people who find games meaningful when they explore ideas with systems. Bleak Blues says, what about neither? Everything gamer boys say they hate about walking sims, that there's no skill and nothing to do, are exactly what I like about these. I kept thinking about Eastshade, a nice little game I played last month about being a painter. I thought about how satisfying it was to look at a pretty view and frame it, to sit and wait for the light to be just right. I also thought about the game's crafting mechanics, how painting consumed resources, and how the primary way you got resources was by completing story quests that required you to make specific paintings, and how often I'd see a beautiful landscape and decide not to paint it because I didn't want to waste the canvases I needed for story missions, and how in the late game when I was well stocked with crafting materials, I had to consciously unlearn my early game habits because, in a sense, Eastshade had trained me not to paint. And it made me appreciate Bleak Blues all the more. It doesn't need systems or story, though it could benefit from an easel. They feel like spaces where stories did happen long ago. But the games don't ask you to wonder what those stories were or to imagine your own, to wonder who you are or how you got here and where everyone else has gone. They're not stages for things to happen on. They ask only, how does it feel to be here? This is the whole thing. Don't miss that. I did think about Connor Sherlock sitting at his computer making one of these things every month, putting together a unique feel and booting it up to go visit. And utter dweeb that I am, I kept thinking, is this what it feels like to be Atris? Like, remember the ending of Myst? How it let you keep wandering the island and the ages with no more puzzles and no more story, just letting you be there without having to do anything? That was the win state.
At the time of release of this video, you can get this collection of 9 walking sims for $8 on itch. Also, if you for some reason missed out on Ian's videos so far, then I urge you to hop over and correct that right away. Like on his channel, Innuendo Studios, he's done some of my absolute favorite video essays on this damn platform, covering a wide range of topics across games, art, politics, and culture. From his exploration of the beauty of spectator sport through the lens of Smash Bros, his 6-part series about angry gamers and harassment, that pretty brilliant dissection of the beginner's guide I still think about from time to time, or that 8-part series about Mad Max Fury Road, or the ongoing alt-right playbook dissection of right-wing rhetoric. Like, there is honestly not a single video on his channel that I wouldn't recommend in a heartbeat, so don't miss out on it. The links to all of what I just mentioned you'll find in the description of this video. Okay, so the next segment is not going to be covered by a video essay or YouTube person, but by a game developer. In fact, Airdorf is the very first creator that I covered in the very first episode of Games from Underground with his indie horror gem Faith. So hey, indie developers shouting out other indie developers, I'm here for it. So today, Airdorf is going to share with you one of his favorite picks from the bundle, which also happens to be a game that I've been fond of for quite some time. Laundry Bear Games' funeral director simulator, A Mortician's Tale.
Hey everybody, Airdorf here. Now, if you put over 1,000 games in front of me and told me to pick just one to talk about, you'd think I'd pick a spooky horror game. But when Ragnar approached me about reviewing one of the titles from itch.io's hugely successful bundle for racial justice and equality, I thought I'd do something a little different. So the game that I'll be reviewing is 2017's A Mortician's Tale. You know, because I also had a game that had like Mortis and never mind. Okay, moving on. If I had to describe A Mortician's Tale in one sentence, it would go like this. A Mortician's Tale is a gentle, thought-provoking game about how we react to death. I've attended several funerals in my life, at least 11, for all sorts of people, ranging from a young child who died in a tragic accident to my great-aunt who lived to be over 90 before simply dying of old age. I've attended funerals for complete strangers, friends, and also immediate family. If it's one thing I've learned, it's that everyone reacts to death differently. The human aspect of addressing and confronting death is the core experience of a Mortician's tale. Throughout the game, you will attend several funeral services, and you'll overhear the conversations of family and friends of the departed as they confront death in their own way. Oftentimes, I saw myself in these characters, and if you've ever been to a funeral service, I think you will too. Additionally, A Mortician's Tale explores the concept of death positivity by putting you in the shoes of a mortician working at a family-owned funeral home. The player is tasked with preparing the deceased for their funerals, be it through embalming, cremation, or whatever special requests their loved ones make. These tasks play out as mini-games, basically, where you will perform functions such as cleaning dead bodies and draining embalming fluid from their organs, and placing their bones into an industrial grinder after cremation. This sounds visceral and disgusting, but the game's visual style makes the experience more intimate than horrifying. Going through these tasks is a ponderous experience, more of an interactive meditation, rather than an actual game that you can win or lose. There are many other thought-provoking moments in the game that have to do with the story, so I won't spoil them for you here. Just make sure you carefully read all the emails and explore all the web pages presented before each stage. I think the greatest strength of A Mortician's Tale is how it presents a unique insider's perspective on a topic we often try not to think about and an industry we often take for granted. If you've got an hour to spare and are looking for a slower, more meditative game experience, then check it out.
At the time of release of this video, A Mortician's Tale is available on itch.io, Humble Store, and Steam for $8.99. Also, make sure to follow Airdorf on his Twitter, on his website, and on his itch.io profile. All the links are down in the description. So for the next segment, I've once again invited Michael Saba to take over a guest narration on this channel. So if you followed my work for a while, I'm pretty sure you're familiar in some form with Michael's work by now. He's done some of the best video essay content on YouTube over on his channel Dreaming in Neon. We've podcasted together. Hey, there was also one episode about Mist and Riven with Ian. Should check that out. And Michael's also regularly written for this channel's videos. And his choice from the itch.io bundle is Fortune 499, a game about magic and money where you play as a fortune-telling witch working in the magical resources department of a mega corporation. The real horror.
We have practiced this divination for millennia. The spontaneity of nature holds powers greater than our wildest imaginations.
You're such a loyal employee, such a hard worker. But the boss has some bad news. See, all that creative labor you do, spinning the threads of your personality and imagination into golden profit for the corporation. Well, these days, there are computers and predictive algorithms that can do all that work for us. And the company has been under a lot of pressure from the board of directors to reduce expenditures on non-essential personnel.
What would you say you do here?
It's times like these when you'll hear the 7 scariest words in the corporate HR lexicon. Unfortunately, we're moving in a different direction. If the scenario I just described feels in any way familiar to you, then Fortune 499 is very much worth your time. But even if you haven't squandered the best years of your life as a corporate drone like me, there's still a lot to recommend this anime-flavored, fruit sherbet-colored, JRPG-inspired deck builder. The tale of Fortune 499 follows the young witch Cassandra, or Cassie, who works as a fortune teller in the magical resources department of an appropriately nameless and faceless megacorporation. Right as your boss is getting ready to sack you because there's no future in the future anymore, the company's board of directors completes an initial public offering. The only problem is, this IPO didn't summon a horde of venture capitalists who want to shower the company with investment money. It unleashed an army of demons who launch one of the most hellish mergers and acquisitions you can imagine. Yeah, this game isn't subtle. And so, it falls to Cassie to use her fortune-telling powers to battle the hordes of corporate hell. But Cassie doesn't have any chain lightning spells or dragon shouts in her arsenal. Her main magical power is her ability to use a tarot-like deck of cards to predict the future. The game's JRPGs combat system presents your battles as extended matches of rock, paper, scissors. You draw and play cards from a deck in order to predict what the enemy's next move will be. If you draw a scissors card, there is a higher chance the enemy will play scissors for their next move. This means the correct move is to play rock against your foe. But it's ultimately all down to chance, so the vagaries of fate may see the enemy playing paper after you've stacked them up with rocks and scissors. You can draw multiple cards per turn, but sometimes peering too far into the future can do more harm than good. If you draw a paper, then a scissors, then another paper, then another scissors, your predictions effectively cancel each other out. The deck building part comes in with how the player is given various opportunities to upgrade cards in their collection, add new cards to their deck, or shred and remove unwanted cards. It's a simple but surprisingly deep system. There's enough variation and randomness to your enemies and their card draws that there's no single ideal deck composition, so the player is well rewarded for planning and thoughtful experimentation. There's also a ton of heart and charm to the characters and story, stuff that will hit especially close to home for anyone who has spent any amount of time in the corporate Thunderdome. The apocalypse has arrived, and the multiverse is in a moment of maximum peril. But as far as Cassie is concerned, she's tired and doesn't have time for the world's nonsense right now. She's just trying to do her job, get through the day, and get home to her cats. Honestly, super relatable. Our ability to think on the future, to dream, is one of the most powerful and humanizing experiences there is. There is power in even the most humble tarot deck. Enough power to change.
At the time of release of this video, Fortune 499 is available on Steam and itch.io for $4.99. That makes sense. Also, please make sure to check out Michael's channel. He has just released a massive, fantastic dissection of Metal Gear Solid 5 to show what a misunderstood masterpiece that game really is. The video is excellent, I highly recommend it, and I also highly recommend every other video on his channel, so don't miss this. The links, as you know, you can find in the description. My next guest is definitely one of my favorite creators when it comes to deep diving into point-and-click adventure games with extremely fun and lighthearted delivery. So fittingly, Scarfulu will present to you one of his favorite point-and-click adventure picks from Itch's bundle, which is Milkmaid of the Milky Way.
It's no secret that I'm a pretty big fan of the point-and-click genre. At this point, this is a well-documented fact. I mean, I'm the type of person who releases an 80-minute video about Monkey Island. I like this kind of game a lot.
Ah, a red herring.
So one thing I was hoping to find from itch.io's bundle for racial justice and equality was a game that I had perhaps missed from recent years. As it so happens, I was in luck, as I came across Milkmaid of the Milky Way, released in 2017. It's a shame that this game was overlooked, but when I consider that it was released in the same year as Thimbleweed Park and Paradigm, I can perhaps see why it went under my radar a bit. The initial premise of Milkmaid is pretty simple. You take the role of Ruth, an orphaned milkmaid trying to get by with a small herd of beloved cows. In a Norwegian fjord in the 1920s, it's up to you to use a fairly streamlined point-and-click interface to guide Ruth in her duties in the making of butter and cheese. But that only covers the milkmaid part of the title. What about the Milky Way bit? Well, things soon become much stranger. Ruth's cows get abducted by an alien spaceship, as cows are often prone to do. The milkmaid life is all Ruth has at this point, so she bravely leaps onto the ship and works her way in. From here, she discovers a conspiracy amongst the alien community living on it, and works with and around them to liberate her cows from the ship. You'll work with engineers, cooks, seedy old women, and even poke a frog to get what you need. I don't think any of the puzzles are really too difficult, though the hoverbike segment confused me a little bit more than it really ever should have done. The pixel art presented by this game is simple, yet effective, especially with the segments taking place in the fjord, combined with the very calming soundtrack. It creates a very chilled out atmosphere. What really drew me into this game so quickly though was the fairy tale vibes it gave off from the outset. I immediately noticed that every line of dialogue in this game rhymes. I haven't seen this in a point and click before. so I was quite charmed by it. It also made it feel like a story being told to children, which gave it a very cozy feeling. Like the video game equivalent of hot chocolate and a warm fireplace on a cold winter's day. I wouldn't say all the rhymes are amazing. Some of them are a bit of a stretch and others feel like they could have done with an extra draft or two to give them a better rhythm when you read it. But ultimately, it was very sweet. And there wasn't a point where any of it outstayed its welcome. It's not just fairy tale vibes this game gives either. Oddly, I would say that Milkmaid of the Milky Way almost has some Studio Ghibli vibes to it as well. Not in the visual style, obviously, but in the kind of story being told. Low stakes stories, yet still full of emotion, often starring young women finding their path in life. The kind of warmth I feel inside while watching something like Howl's Moving Castle is mirrored here. I mean, there is a point in the game where the protagonist is aged up into an old woman as well, so they do have a couple things in common. I'm a big fan of games that make you feel emotional, and this game was able to evoke that at a couple of points. And you know what? I am not ashamed to admit that one scene here almost had me crying about one of these little pixelated cows. If you can make me cry about a cow I've known for about an hour, I think you're probably doing something right. All in all, this isn't a very long game. It only took me about an hour and a half to finish, but I imagine Milkmaid of the Milky Way will be sticking with me for much longer than that. So bravo, Mattis Folkestad. While I initially missed Milkmaid at its initial release in 2017, your next project won't pass me by. And for me right now, I believe that's time. I shall end my segment with an attempt at rhyme. If you're looking for a cute and cozy point and click to play, look no further than Milkmaid of the Milky Way.
Milkmaid of the Milky Way was actually a game that I had played a good while before the bundle came out, and I found it incredibly charming as well, especially since it takes place in a Norwegian fjord, and if you ask me, a lot more games should take place in Norway. Just saying. At the time of release of this video, Milkmaid of the Milky Way is available on Steam, the Mac App Store, and itch.io for $4.99. Also, make sure to follow Scarfulo over on his channel. I discovered him many years ago when I finally found a good video on one of my favorite adventure games, The Longest Journey, and ever since then, I've recommended this video to everyone who didn't know about the game and who I wanted to show what's actually so cool about it. And hey, this one's definitely old hat by now, so he's been getting better and better and better over the years, so if you go over and check it out, check out newer ones. Just saying. And I recommend making sure to watch that 80-minute long dissection of Monkey Island he mentioned before. It's a wonderfully in-depth trip down memory lane. At least it was for me. All the links you'll find in the description. The next guest contributor is probably the person I've spent the most time watching content of on YouTube of all of them, because I found them through their coverage of one of my personal favorite games of all time, Pathologic 1. Sumatul has, in my humble opinion, done one of the best comprehensive, narrated start-to-finish Let's Plays of this game and its sequel on her channel, as well as a number of incredibly well-written, in-depth, dissertation-style essays on Pathologic, on The Void, and on so much more. And I've watched all of them. So that was a lot of time. Which is why today's pick might come as a surprise for some. Instead of picking another darkly philosophical, pretentious, that you have to write a master's thesis on to halfway understand it, we're getting Butterfly Soup, a heartfelt and hilarious visual novel about a lovable bunch of queer Asian American adolescents, written and developed by Brianna Lay.
Butterfly Soup is a wonderfully gay visual novel by Brianna Lay, an indie developer also famous for the game Palm Gets Wi-Fi. It's a hilarious and heartfelt journey through adolescence, dating, and dumb teenage memes, and it's absolutely one of my favourite games from the bundle. Now, I'm Sulmatul, the person you may know for talking about relentlessly grim video games about plagues and despair, and given 2020 apparently made all of my gaming shenanigans real, I've decided I want to cover something that's instead far more joyful. Sometimes you gotta have some light in your life. Sorry, horror buffs. This game follows a coming-of-age story about 4 very definitely queer Asian American teenagers as they try to make sense of themselves, the world they're growing up in, and the expectations of those around them. Each of them has a past, a family that almost certainly doesn't approve of them, and they're all struggling to make sense of their future, one in which they implicitly know that they'll face social rejection. But, and this is the important thing, they still find solace and care with each other, and that's more than enough to get by on. We follow their story and see their young childhood memories, the moments of confused, bumbling affection, and their earnest attempts to act on their gay crushes without even fully understanding what those feelings are. We see the confusion and hurt that rocks a family when a parent's societal expectations of femininity clash hard against a distinctly non-binary identity of their child. We see the social isolation that a child experiences when their parents encourage them to view those around them as disposable competition, not reliable friends. We see how the fear of needing to perform to a constantly high standard pushes some into becoming affable clowns, because never truly trying means that you never have to admit your own limitations. And even in those who have a happy-ish family life, we can see how wider social rejection, whether for your race, sexuality, or neurodivergence, can cause someone to become cripplingly shy or otherwise withdrawn. But I promised you a joyful experience, and so far this description isn't very overly joyful, is it? Well, dear viewer, that's precisely why this little visual novel is as brilliant as it is. Because despite the heavy subject matter, the painful moments in the backdrop, and the portrayal of the frankly terrifying experience of queer adolescence, this game shines through perfectly with an uplifting tale of memes, love, and baseball. Even though our four protagonists are clearly a touch damaged in their own ways, have their own neuroticisms, or otherwise struggle with themselves, they still manage to make their own family. Or rather, our two main queers make their family together and are slowly nudged together by their dorky but adorable friends. And the amount of well-written comedy, quiet jokes, and perfectly timed pop culture notes give a wonderfully nostalgic flashback to adolescence in the mid-2000s, whilst never feeling stale or otherwise out of place. The romantic comedy blossoms naturally and perfectly, and throughout I couldn't help but root for our two protagonists to finally get together. And hey, if none of that does it for you, there's also more than a few cute dogs too. While I never personally had the experiences of a queer, cis girl's adolescence, I am at least a bit LGBT adjacent, and damn did this game hit home for me. And the best thing was, I was having such a good time with the comedy of it, that I didn't notice just how emotionally invested I was. I didn't realize how much I loved and cared for the characters until their emotionally impactful moments hit like a truck. Basically, this game is amazingly written, and you should totally give it a shot. Especially if you're LGBT. You'll probably really enjoy this one.
At the time of release of this video, Butterfly Soup is available over on itch.io for free. Also, make sure to follow Sumatul over on her channel for, as I said, the great coverage of Pathologic, and also she just released a just as greatly narrated playthrough of one of my all-time favorites, Knights of the Old Republic 2. The links are, as always, in the description. Hey everyone, you made it to the end. Yay, congrats, and I just want to say thank you. No, seriously, thank you to those who have been sticking around with my content for many months or even years. It's crazy. Every time I hear someone say that they've been around for so long, it's genuinely baffling and humbling to me. So wow, yeah, thanks. Also, thank you just as much if you're someone who just found my channel and watched videos to the end and hopefully found something enjoyable in them. Thank you for giving me your time. This series, and this video in particular, was a lot about giving back and, sharing platform. About shedding some light on games that you might have missed but might have a great time with, depending on your personal preferences and all. Giving platform to the tiny teams of indie developers who pour their heart and soul into making them, to other content creators whose work I've enjoyed for a long time, and also to give platform to the still ongoing and incredibly important Black Lives Matter protests. As I've mentioned before, the ad revenue of this video will go to the same charities that itch.io's bundle supported. If you yourself can spare something, you might want to consider pitching in as well. It's incredibly important in this moment in time, and it truly matters. The links you'll also find in the description. Man, the description of this video is going to be so incredibly long. And yeah, I also need to make a living somehow, so lastly but very importantly, I would also like to thank the people who support my channel on Patreon. It's been the bread and butter of this channel for years, my central and most important source of income that fuels my work with these videos, and without your support, I simply couldn't continue doing this. So genuinely, thank you for enabling me. Now, if you personally are or have been considering to join the community at some point in the past and it won't stifle you financially, then follow the link to my Patreon to pitch in, and maybe you'll read your name in the credits of my future videos or hear me read it out like one of these lovely people here. Isabella Stoner, Chuck Taylor, Norbert Gerard Martinka, Evan Tekrö, Christine, Max Macula, Matt Gretton, Agustin Ortega, Ty McCandless, David Zelenak, Kevin H. Yang, Laird Wakala, Alex Popov, Pablo Arcelis, Swallowtail Knights, Sophia Ong, Terry Collins, Space Admiral Vivi, Casper Ram, Nikot the Brave, Andrew Hines, Joey Monster, 9Ball9606, Wobbles and Bean the Wonder Ducks, Puka Princess, Jin Hansen, Giselle Almonte, Mura Casardis, Mauricio Reyna, Thwagam, Lawrence E. Buben, Kenan Ward, Starina Abrahamson, Hunter Crawford and Margaret Strawn, Faulty Gear, Dimitar Slutkov, Refkins, Dr. Haley Isabella Colley, Alan Wilder, Sophie Powelson, Chris Chan, Ronan Crom, aka Daniel 242172, Billy Lott, Chrissy, Catherine Escobar, Quentin Podom, Malim, Dana Rosa, Cordelia Crescendo, and Shannon Blue. Until next time, ta-da!